So that's Mike.
That's Toya.
And this is Tech Beats and Bytes.
I'd like to welcome y'all to the first official episode of Tech Beats and Bytes. We have finally established the equipment setup.
Right, we're doing big things, y'all.
As you can see, we got banners in the back.
New microphone.
The lights ain't gonna go off. We got the timer.
Oh, we got the timer right?
We got the timer
That's
right.
good. That was crazy last time.
It was.
Yeah.
That's what you have to go through for them first time around.
Right, we gotta test it out.
So, we have some amazing guests here. We wanted to switch up the format a little bit. We realized sometimes having just one person, we can stretch it out, but the community has kind of started looking out to us to address more topics and issues.
Mm-hmm.
So, since we're streaming live now, so just know there's no opportunity to edit out the things you say. There's about a 7-second delay, so we can catch something, but we can't
a little
edit it
censorship.
out. Yeah, so just a little bit. But what we wanted to do is allow you guys to introduce yourself, and we're going to jump right into the conversations. We'll briefly talk about it, but we have some topics. Primarily, we will not focus on religion, but due to the state of affairs, we will be discussing politics these days. Just because. So if you can, please go ahead and introduce yourself so the audience knows who we have here today.
I am Weber J. Charles, the Senior Site Director at Breakthrough Miami, also Executive Board Member with the NIA Project, and also Board Chair for the Excelsior Charter School System.
My name is Chris Caines. I am the Executive Director of the Miami Urban Futures Initiative, an initiative housed at FIU and is a partnership between Florida International University, MANA Wynwood, and the Creative Class Group in Dr. Richard, Florida, generously supported by Knight Foundation.
Fantastic. Welcome to the stage, guys.
So,
Thank you.
if you notice the difference, I'm sure you guys saw your flyer and it was like,
Café con leche. Coffee and cream.
Right, but it gave for good optics, you know? It caught your attention.
and so we started talking about a series of portraits and artwork that's going to be coming out called Becoming One. So it'll be people that have collaborated together as couples, friends, etc. And you guys are primarily affecting youth. You're really big into mentorship and leading people. Mm-hmm. So can you kind of tell us individually about what's going on in your programs, and we'll just progress the conversation from there. Let me be more specific. I want to know about Breakthrough Miami, and then of course, with your departure and your new venture, we definitely want to know about that.
So with Breakthrough, the best way to describe Breakthrough and what we do is that we basically hack the school system. We take the school system and we flip it upside down.
Right.
So essentially, we are in a community where schools are segregated, and the resources end up in certain communities, and other communities have, a shortfall of resources. So what we do is we go out into the communities that are the resources that have the shortfall of the resources, and we identify students that are really motivated and really have that intellectual passion, really have a broad imagination, and have a zest for life. And we take those students in, and we provide them with academic enrichment in the school year and in the summer for 6 weeks, right? Then we do something else on top of that, and this is where the hacking the school system part comes in. We do intensive school choice counseling. So most of our families don't know that there is a plethora of school options in South Florida. So in New York, you take a test.
What do you mean by plethora?
A plethora. There's a variety of school choices.
Right.
Like you can fill out the Magnet application and select 5 schools, right? Then you can research charter schools and apply to as many charter schools as you'd like. And then on top of that, there's independent schools, which we have a lot of independent schools in South Florida. And if you want to go beyond that threshold, then there's boarding schools. So we educate our parents from these communities on every tier.
Yeah.
And based on the talent and the imagination of the student and the family, we match them up to whatever level that we think that they can get to. So it's not for me to come in to a school and say, okay, Johnny's really smart, but Johnny will just feed into the school that's in his community, right? Well, Johnny's really smart and really talented. Shouldn't Johnny be able to go to the school that matches his qualities, his intellectual curiosity, his talents, whether he plays music or sports? He should be able to go to the school that's going to meet him or hers, intellectual capacity. And so for me, if that doesn't happen, then that's potential lost.
Okay.
And when a child loses potential, we lose.
Potential. All right. And Chris?
Right.
So kind of approaching it maybe from a little bit different angle, less so specifically education, even though I am at FIU and working for FIU. It's really more looking towards the future, which I think perhaps ties into education in terms of a next generation. What we do is we provide data-driven reports that hopefully do deep dive analysis around certain topics in our community. So that's anything from innovation and entrepreneurship to talent to affordability, really trying to benchmark where Miami is relative to other metros. And then using that data to create a platform for community engagement and conversations about our strengths and weaknesses. So like really good examples of this is in a report that came out from our institute last year. We showed that we actually have the second highest percentage of people that have mortgages that are homeowners that are actually cost burdened, meaning that they spend more than 40% of their income on housing. Out of the 53 major metro areas, Miami is number 2 in the country. For renters, it's about 62%. So 62% of renters are spending more than 40% of their income on housing. And that's just a really good example of something that kind of becomes anecdotally, we feel like, yeah, we're all spending a lot of money on rent, but there are other narratives out there too around, okay, well, yeah, your rents are actually lower than, say, a San Francisco or a New York or something like that, but then there's also the tension with like wages, and like your wages are also lower. This kind of gives an opportunity to quantify it and say, okay, take everything into account. We're still really far behind in this metric here. A more positive one would be around our talent attraction and retention. So a lot of people talk about the brain drain in Miami and how we as a community have a hard time holding on to college graduates. In our research, we're just finding that's just not true. Of the 53 major metros, again, in the country, Miami is actually 16th in terms of percentage and rate of college students who are still in Miami 4 years after graduation.
Wow.
So that's an example of like there's a narrative out there like we're losing talent, but it's not really squaring with the data. So then the kind of second step is, all right, well, how can we facilitate a conversation to, number one, make that data useful to policymakers and other community groups and other people working to advance our community? But also, how can we kind of fix the gap? Like, how can we hack the gap? Like, where are these misconceptions kind of coming from where Miami actually is relative to the data versus anecdotes? And a lot of times it kind of uncovers other things. So in the scheme of conversations, for example, people are like, yeah, you're measuring the 4-year retention rate, so that lets us know you probably have a lot of good entry-level jobs, but have you thought about measuring the 8-year rate or the 12-year rate or another number that might show, hey, actually we're doing a really good job on these entry-level jobs but not as good on these mid-level jobs. So it's kind of an interaction between community-based organizations and other folks who get us to think about things, but then also providing the research and the data to kind of inform the conversation.
Yeah. And I already, especially what you were talking about, there's definitely synergy, not even from what we were looking to talk about, but just from what you said about sort of the data that can help, because I already see how what you're doing can directly feed into Breakthrough. Absolutely. In terms of school systems and making sure that students are going where they need to go and then showcasing the proof of why that makes sense. This is going to be a fantastic conversation.
It is. So
yeah.
with that being said, anything you guys had to do for your boss or organizations, that was your chance. So this is how we allow people to get on live. Now we're going to get into the heart of the conversation.
Yes.
As you know, I got my boys from Maven. They come and support because they know I'm going to start getting outlandish and getting into it. So you guys said one word that stuck and it was hack. So I think that's a great opportunity for LaToya to talk about that later. But you were talking about talent in Florida. And I think respectfully, there's a love-hate relationship with South Florida. Almost to the point I think South Florida should become its own state, just because it's so different from
the rest of
Orlando
Florida?
down to the rest of Florida. Because the rest of Florida is really the South. With the things you're trying to do, how do we actually fix the mindset? And the reason why I bring that up is because, you know, I was recently at Black Tech Week, and I think about some of the conferences that happen here. And then I think about how like Afro Tech has just taken off, and you know the Valley is really supporting that in the West Coast. Why can't we get people in South Florida to take things and initiatives serious? I feel like we have to work twice as hard to get people to see the change you're trying to make. And even when it comes to children, you know, I just feel if Trayvon Martin, and I hate to say this, but I feel if Trayvon Martin had died in another state, every year his event would be 10 times bigger than what it is here. Do we really have the passion that we need to push ourselves to the next level in the state of Florida? In the state of South Florida? Yeah, I'm going to ask hard questions. That's what it's about. I seen Don Lemon been killing it, so that's my inspiration. Don been going in, I'm going in. And be honest.
That's a heavy question. I think when you think of South Florida, my question to you is like, where's the black base? You know, Atlanta, it's a black city. You know, Portland has a...
Our black base is in Palm Beach County and North Broward. That's where most of your African Americans truly live.
Right. So I think in Miami's evolution, and I always speak from the perspective and what my experience has been, is that as Miami evolves, it's at the expense of the critical mass movement of black folk, right? So for Miami to expand its highways, right, Overtown had to be segmented and chopped up and essentially killed what would be the second Black Renaissance or the second Harlem Renaissance.
Yeah, I mean, they could have went a little further east and not made that happen. So, I mean,
Correct.
strategically, they've broken down our neighborhoods. But hold on, before you continue, Chris, this goes with you. I mean, FIU doesn't get a lot of recognition it should, because FIU gives away, I think it was for the computer science degrees, they had like the most degrees that were given away, especially to minorities throughout the United States of America. So even though we're doing things, and understand my comments aren't of the basis that we don't have a community that's not doing. It seems to be a lack of respect for the things we do. So like even with FIU, it's still looked at as just a school versus a true university that has multiple campuses.
Which drives me crazy too, actually. FIU is the 4th largest public research university in the country. There's over 56,000 students at FIU, over 9,000 employees. When you think about scaling education, the future of higher education looks a lot less like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and a lot more like schools like FIU.
Is it just because we don't have a good football team down here? Is that really what, I mean, because in the South, I mean, it's funny, but I'm just saying, in the South, football is embraced, and that's where sponsors, that's where boosters, that's where extra money comes
Attention
in.
comes from.
FIU is also a really young school, right?
Right.
So, I mean, you're talking about a school that really came of age in the 70s, and it doesn't necessarily have the historical context or...
70 sounds young when you talk about a school. When you talk about age, I still feel old. Just 70s.
But it's you know, it's a young school, and a lot of these schools that depend on alumni bases and giving bases that have only been around for a couple generations, have only had kind of a couple groups of people go through all of their earning potential and stuff, giving back to the university. And then you have, I mean, just categorically speaking as an individual here, just, you know, blatant racism in the funding formulas that come down from the state at times, in terms of how certain schools are privileged over other schools, how certain counties are privileged over other counties. We are in Florida a pretty strongly divided 50-50 state in terms of who actually makes up our entire state. But because the concentration is so deep down here, and because of the way districts are drawn, one party has disproportionate amount of seats in both the House and the Senate. And guess what? Those are the groups of people that get to decide how a lot of these public dollars are spent. So to your point, if you have a lot of people of one group living in an area that is being continuously disinvested in, like, I mean, I think it's just simple cause and effect.
Go ahead, Toya, because you know I got
Yeah, I was gonna say, it sounds like we need to spread out a little bit and diversify, and give some of our brain power to some other parts of the state of Florida. But, you know, just from what I'm hearing from both of you guys, it sounds like we just really do a bad job of telling our story.
Yes.
And that's what we are all about at Digital Grass, is narratives and capturing the essence of what it is. So even the fact that you were giving about, you know, 16th in terms of, you know, I mean, it's mind-blowing to think that there's so many attributes and so many things to be proud of, but no one knows. So if no one knows, and nothing's going to happen, you're not going to have champions, you're not going to have anybody that comes and supports and helps to catapult the efforts and that are happening from Breakthrough, because I know you get a lot of support. Breakthrough's heavily funded, and you get a lot of support, you have a lot of volunteers. How has sort of changing your narrative and telling your story, how has that worked for you? Because maybe what you do can be applied to some of the other organizations.
The whole mission with working with Breakthrough Miami is a personal mission, right? In the students that I have in that organization, that I serve in that organization, I see myself. You know, kids that potentially grew up in a home that was with domestic violence, kids that have grown up in communities with gun violence, kids that are, you know, undocumented, DACA. So I see myself in a lot of those kids. And so Breakthrough's long-term investment in the students from 4th to 12th grade allows you to see the whole story, right? Where kids go to school in elementary school, and then they transition to middle school, and if they don't go to a K-8 or a 612, then they transition again. We get to see the story longfold, right? And so I've been able to see 5, 6, 7 classes graduate, right? Starting from that point when I walked into the classroom and said, hey, I'm Mr. Charles, I'm with Breakthrough Miami.
But why don't I know about Breakthrough Miami? Like, I know you, I've seen your picture, we haven't met. So we were talking about it. Chris, you said something that just stuck out to me, the racism in funding. Like, so let's get down to the real talk, all right? Let's remove the Knight Foundation. Let's just remove them. If you don't have the Knight Foundation, what's the percentile of the stuff that's happening now happening without the Knight Foundation?
Okay.
Percentage. And the percentage number, how much of the stuff do we see happening now is happening without the help of the Knight Foundation?
Citywide, you'd mean it.
Citywide. I would include the Miami Foundation and all the personal foundations as well. I think a lot less would be happening.
But percentage. But see, you got to remember that we're on TV.
Right.
We got people that don't understand the story. So this is the problem that we have with storytelling.
Okay.
Miami Foundation still filters and takes care of a lot of the money from the Knight Foundation. So it's still a large percentage of what they're doing is coming from the Knight Foundation. Remove Knight. And if I had to put up a chart when we're doing this in post-editing, what's the percentage of drop of what we see happen actively in this community happening without the Knight Foundation?
I would say you would get like at least like a 60% drop.
Okay.
I think they carry
60?
that much weight.
What you think, Chris?
What do you think?
What you think?
I don't even know if the number is that important, but I do think that when you have, and I full disclosure, I used to work at Knight Foundation, and I think that anytime you have an over-reliance on any one organization doing one thing, it's tough for any kind of portfolio where you're extremely dependent on any one entity. You know, you're beholden to an entity, and so when you think about like what the example I gave before was more on a public scale. We do have some great private philanthropy. We have some great partners all over the community who are coming in and supporting.
Is the private funding, as I would totally use it wrong, and my woman will tell you this without prejudice, but is the private funding actually open? are we actually seeing an equal distribution of funding based off of what you was? And I know the answer, but we have a community.
So
that
I think those are good questions. I just don't know how different Miami is from other communities in this sense, right?
With the same predicament.
And so I mean I think that it's great that we hold ourselves to a very high standard in Miami, and I think we should continue to. But part of our, in terms of storytelling, is that we talk ourselves down sometimes. We're our own worst hype men sometimes, and hype women. And we kind of run the risk of saying we speak things into existence in a certain way, and we kind of negatively asset frame, and then we expect people to see the good in us. I think that can be tough at times too.
Absolutely.
That's a valid point.
Your initial question, it went deficit for me, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, like I'm part of Be Me, like Miami Gardens, Oliver Gilbert. I know a lot of black folks doing amazing things. And
we just don't get to tell the story.
We don't get to tell the story, but it's happening. You know, you got Valencia Gunda upstairs. We got a lot, black folks. Remember, we're in a frontier city. Like, Miami is a young city.
Yes.
So you can't compare us to an Atlanta where they've been an academic cluster there.
How old is Miami?
Years,
just over 100 something years?
Just over 100 years.
1896, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so we're young. So we're still in the process of kind of figuring out who we are, right? As a city as a whole. So that's
which I don't disagree with, but it's just my job now. We've become part storytellers, part reporters, and sometimes when the right hard questions don't get asked, you don't expose the information to other people that don't know it. Right. So I don't know how many people outside of Miami are actually. I don't even know how many people in Miami know that Miami is only a 100-year-old city, and you know how things built up. And I don't know if people knew the information about FIU. I don't know if people knew the information about Breakthrough. But my thing is, I don't care about other cities at this point, because I don't live in other cities and I don't plan on having children in other cities. What I care about is, what do we do to start fixing some of these problems in Miami so that my children don't have to have that same experience?
Okay. So I think a lot of these, if I could just really quickly, I think a lot of these problems are so multifaceted, and the debate around them is so hard to have. And so with the Miami Urban Futures Initiative, the hope is to have data-driven research to at least be a starting point for a conversation. It's really hard.
Can you unpack that? Because that's the one thing you've said it, but I get some of it. I don't even think I fully get it. When you say data-driven research as a starting point, can you kind of unpack that a little more?
So we create indices, we create just kind of deep research around different trends in our community, largely around economic trends. Economic and talent-driven trends to try to understand where our competitive strengths are and where our weaknesses are. So we're not cheerleaders for Miami. We'll tell you that we are super unaffordable by most metrics and kind of give you the background as to how we came up with that number and how we got there.
So has anything led towards like the food industry, tourism? Like, what are some of the things that you're seeing, or what are some of the trends that maybe people aren't aware of?
Yeah, so there's kind of a few different classes of workers, if you will. You have your creative class of workers, which are more creatives, but also lawyers, doctors, more white-collar type professionals. Then you have your service class of workers, which is more hospitality and those kind of folks. And then you have your working class folks, which is more manufacturing, which we have less of in Miami, of course. Our share of service workers in Miami is around 50%. That is, of the 53 major metros, the second highest share. Well, guess what? Service class workers make the lowest wages. Right. So when the largest group of your workforce is making the lowest wages, like, you're going to have some really, really staggering wealth inequity. Yeah. In our recent report that we released last year as well, there's two different ways you can kind of measure wealth inequity, and we're second and sixth, depending on how you measure it, out of the major metro areas. We are on par with Zimbabwe in terms of our wealth inequity. And so the idea is not to shock people, but just to say, this is kind of where we're coming from here. How can we now have a debate that informs this? And we're still new. We're getting our footing. I've been in my job for 2 weeks now, and so
you're doing a great job.
Thank you. So we're trying to find.
We feel the impact already.
Right. We're still trying to find our way too. And then 6 months from now, I might be saying completely different talking points. But at least for now, I genuinely believe that at a time of increasing polarization, at a time when national and kind of federal uncertainty is among us, local institutions matter. Trusted data matters, and having platforms for where we can at least agree on a shared set of facts, off of which we can draw tons of different opinions and have tons of different analysis, is important.
Yes. Yeah. So talking about, go ahead.
And while he's collecting that data, we're creating intentional collisions with Breakthrough Miami. So we're we're making sure that the bright students that are in the inner city schools or low income schools or under-resourced schools are making those connections with students at private institutions, right? And also making connections with professors and educators at the college level, right? And so, and we're also bringing together low-income families with wealthy families in the one goal and the one mission of making sure that we lift everyone at the same time.
Right.
And so that's kind of how we address that wealth and equity thing. We want to make sure that they understand that just because the students at a low-income school doesn't mean that they can't run with you academically in your private school or your boarding school. And we've done it over and over again and demonstrated that a Teron Ferguson can go to the London School of Economics and come and matriculate from Olinda Elementary.
Exactly.
So,
And that's actually where I was going with my question, because you sort of touched on the phase 2, and that was going to be my question for you, is phase 2 of the data. So you've collected it, you have the stats, but how does that now, do corporations then buy the data from you? So
No.
what kind of happens?
Yeah. So I think, and I view my job as being a central part of this, but like we have to find a way to make this useful for folks, right?
Right.
Otherwise, it just sits on the shelf. We pat ourselves on the back and
People
say,
quote
"Oh,
it in the paper."
they're so interesting. Yeah. I gotta digigraph and like kind of drop some knowledge, but then like nothing happens, right? And so
Right.
the idea is, how can we make it useful to community-based organizations who are out there seeking funding and grants? How can we make it useful to policymakers who are making decisions on what is getting funded and what is getting supported? How can we make it useful to people who are voting in their self-interests and stuff? So it's making it useful. I think that will be a different answer for each group, but finding a way so that this doesn't just become a research product that's sitting on a shelf is super important and central to my job.
Yeah.
And if I can't do that, then that's not good.
So as we were talking about the flyer and we're thinking about the whole Becoming One series, you guys definitely have a pipeline that works together. You know, you're building the students that end up going to college. And I remember that was probably 4 or 5 years ago, there was a big push about the Miami brain drain. And we were just talking about the intelligence and keeping people here in Florida. How do you guys see that working? Because even though we have tons of startups, I still don't see a lot of corporations coming here. I understand we do have a great probability, if you look and think about Amazon, because of them needing to get to South America. So we definitely have a great probability for that. But I mean, are Amazon workers really, bringing home that cheddar? Like, is that really where it's going to be popping? I don't see any foreseen future of that next big thing besides, maybe Magically and Chewy. Those are the only companies you really heard about.
In a decentralized world, though, I don't know if the big corporation is what we need to be chasing just in general. Like, even as we talk about chasing Amazon, Dr. Richard Florida, who's the group behind the research that for the initiative I work for, he's been very vocal and outspoken about not wanting Amazon and how cities really shouldn't be competing and shouldn't be subsidizing. Yeah, I mean, not for your traffic, but then also just in terms of like what kind of incentive packages are going to be delivered. Like, there's a lot of questions that I think sometimes get taken as absolute good, like as all progress is being absolute good, when it's really much more complicated. And not to say that it's not good, but it's just requires a little more storytelling and unpacking. But I don't know if chasing down, I mean, you think about like the company towns, you think about Gary, Indiana, which had U.S. Steel for so long, or some of the other Rust Belt cities that had massive GM plants or Ford plants. Like, I don't know if that model still works in a decentralized, a heavily disrupted world in which you can work from anywhere. You have a phone, you can really kind of work from anywhere. It's a little bit challenging, I think, for us to go out and try to grab that unicorn and get fixated on that. I think having the ingredients to having a fair and inclusive community is almost more important than the individual company or startup that we're attracting or bringing. It's like, are our ingredients right? Is our opportunity spread as equally as our talent in our community? And I think when we get the inputs right, off of that, we'll see things start to ferment and grow. But if we can't hack that, if we can't get that right, I think the consequences are really dire in a way that's different from the old economic development model, which was go bring in a company, put them in a suburban park somewhere and have them hang out. That just doesn't really hold true anymore, I don't think.
I just want to say, man, that night job did you great. You are just so sharp. The speaking is just so on point. You're just killing it up here.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Michael.
But Weber, I think that ties directly back into Breakthrough too, in terms of because you guys are helping to build that pipeline and making sure that the students are ready to even if it's not working at Amazon, they're ready to do whatever that next step is, become an entrepreneur, get into tech or whatever. Share a little bit about the emphasis of Breakthrough, because I know you have different programs, especially over the summer, that focuses on different curriculum. You bring in, I know when I came and spoke, you did a whole historian thing talking about Miami and the pioneers. So there's a lot of good that kind of comes from that, because I know one of the things.
Pioneers like your grandfather?
My great-grandfather, yes.
Great-grandfather, yes.
And grandfather too. But no, so because one of the things I think that keeps people in love with their city is understanding their city and how it started and the people that helped to shape the city. So I definitely want to hear a little bit about what Breakthrough does to sort of engender that in the students.
Well, I think one of the things we do with our students and our family is that Breakthrough is a family-first organization. So most places it's institution focused, where at Breakthrough we look at the people first, and then we shape the institution to serve the people, right? So your family, any family member you talk to and you ask them about Breakthrough Miami, they will say, okay, we're focusing on their needs, and then as their needs change, we're changing our program. So we're constantly innovating, right? So we know that students need to code, so we're teaching them how to code. We provide an innovation lab where we team up with the computer science club at Ransom and allow the students to work with those students and coach them. So right now we have a 16 weeks innovation lab where the students are using Scratch, Code Academy, and I forget the other one, Game Salad, okay? So now our students at 4th and 5th grade are getting this exposure before they go into middle school and high school, okay? Talk to me.
Do students need to know how to code?
I think students need to learn a battery of things, right? They need to get a buffet.
I'm gonna tell you why I asked you that. I don't think it's wrong.
Right.
I don't think it's wrong. I think coding is like almost a secondary language
Okay.
people should know. But we still have parents that don't understand entrepreneurship. We still have a culture that doesn't understand the basics of business. We still have other struggles that haven't been overcome versus learning how to code. There's talent here, and I'm sorry, Chris, it goes back to your statement. There's talent here with the racism of investments. We still are here, and we're stuck where we can't get the money. So I mean, what are we doing if they have those talents and now they're there, but they have to move to San Francisco, Atlanta, New York, or somewhere else? We're still not building the better good and the wealth of what we have here in South Florida.
Can I get tapped in?
Yeah.
So I think, so there's a really good article out there actually called Coding Won't Save the Hood, basically.
Yes.
And it's like the myth that all of a sudden we're going to teach all these people who have been systemically excluded for participating in the knowledge economy around computer science, and then all of a sudden it's going to save the world. Newsflash, those jobs can get automated. Right. But where the value of learning to code and where the value of things like Girls Who Code come in and other programs like that is the ethos of learning how to learn. You learn how to problem solve. You learn how to do things. So yeah, you might not become a software engineer, but you learn this problem solving. You get this confidence built up in a way that really serves you well going forward. Like it's very difficult in our school system, as innovative as our superintendent and everybody is, to have like a liberal arts model where you're just kind of like learning broadly for the sake of learning how to learn at an elementary school level. What if there were some skills that gave you those problem-solving abilities in one class? And that's where I think coding comes in terms of building resiliency, in terms of building these things. So no, like, are they going to be tech workers? I mean, if the opportunity is there, they will be able to cash in. But their skills and the rate of disruption and change is happening so quickly that by the time a third grader today, graduates, I don't know if that's going to be directly transferable. But the resiliency is still there. But the sense of feeling like they could do it. The love of learning is still there, like in a way that I think is really important.
Because I mean, they still have to get interviewed. They still have to get hired.
Absolutely. But
they're still with the struggles. So.
And I think too, the understanding and learning how to code also comes a process of creation. You're doing something and then you see the outcome and you're like, I did that. I built it. Code.
But parents need to be more supportive of creativity in other ways.
Absolutely.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
Because, like,
art, dance, all of it.
Think about, you hear all the parents, you hear these days, or it was like, oh, all you're doing is sitting around playing video games. You keep playing video games. Why are you playing video games? There's millions of dollars in playing video games.
Right. Absolutely. Be a gamer.
So
you got all those little kids.
The parents are so uneducated in what's actually happening.
And how to take their interest.
Their kids down more. I think, and I could be wrong.
Parents
You
do.
have FIU, we have school system. I think the parents are slowing the kids down more than anything else.
Absolutely.
Well, I think structural racism and structural discrimination is slowing everybody down
That-
a little bit more than the parent. I think
Yeah.
parents are the ones operating in a
I had to
system
get you to
where
say it. I was
women
just
of
waiting for
color
you
are
to
getting
finally
paid
say it.
67
It's
cents to the
systemic,
dollar of a
and they're
white
part
man.
of the
Like, I mean,
system.
like, so
Yeah.
I think it's a larger framework. But yeah,
Yes.
we need to find ways to support people at whatever level we're at and try to engender the change that we believe most important to our
Yeah.
communities.
And that goes back to what you were saying, how you change your curriculum based on the child's needs.
Well, I think one of the big things I tell my parents when they join the organization is I need them to have an imagination. I need them to see things they can't see. I
You
need to
get
have,
creative
I need,
when you broke.
Right. I need them to have more
Right.
faith in
The
the,
power
things that
of
they
broke.
don't see than the things they do see.
Right.
Because a lot of things they see in the community aren't real. It's not real.
Right.
Right? So if they have a faith in their dreams and their future, they can hold on to that and actually build something. Right? And that's kind of been my mantra.
Yeah,
Right? I need you to believe in something that you can't see right now.
that's the
And
art of
so-
manifestation.
And so where you say that structural racism keeps them back, once you convert a parent and they believe that their child can do anything and go anywhere, you can't stop that parent. And I've seen it over and over again. So a lot of times we start with the child. The child will do something that's remarkable in 6 months, in a year, right? And then all of a sudden the parent cares about themselves and they want to go back to school.
So we're
And they wanna
selling
try
a
hard.
dream through the kids versus selling the dream to the parents to infuse it into the kid.
Sometimes you gotta flip it on its head. Sometimes you have to flip it on its head. Sometimes when a parent can live vicariously through the child's success, that inspires the child to want to do better for themselves.
But don't parents, especially in South Florida, aren't parents already doing that in sports? Isn't it that we just can't get them to focus outside of that? Because if you see the amount of money that's going into Pop Warner football and everything else and the dedication there, if we could get the same amount of parents to have the enthusiasm for their children to become entrepreneurs or anything else in the world that they put into them getting signed on signing day and going to college and playing football, everything would be different.
Yeah.
I'm going to push back on that again a little bit because I work with families in these communities that aren't all about sports. There's families that live in Liberty City that have their child read 2 and 3 books a month. You know, so I see families.
I'm not disagreeing with that, but what's
Right.
the ratio of that, though? Where's the coverage at it, though? I mean, this goes back to
So I
what we were talking about. I think the content of the storytelling is worse because
Right.
if you guys remember recently on Facebook, they were talking about these kids that were getting accepted into Ivy League schools, and they were kind of having their signing day, and everybody's going
Right.
crazy because they're getting into Harvard and all these other schools. But this is at fault of the media, so I'm not blaming this on you
Right,
guys.
right,
It's just a
right.
topic in theory. But you see news stations shutting down for signing days for football programs, football scholarships. So why wasn't the news covering these young black men getting into Harvard or these young black females getting into these medical schools and things of that nature? We have a problem that I tie all the way back to the music industry. If you think about music, and this is, I guess this is my fun fact for today. If you think about music, think about when Master P was making his music. And Master P was coming out with an album like every 2 weeks.
Out the trunk of his car.
Right.
Yeah.
And then at that point, you also had positive music, and then you had music from New York. When they couldn't control Master P anymore, they brought in Cash Money. And then Baby started making all the music. Cash Money took over. If you think about right around that time when Cash Money came, almost all your positive music went out the door. Then you had Lil Wayne talking about drugs, money, bling, and everything else, all the way to the point where bling got put into the dictionary as an official word. Then after that, you start the implementation of hearing nothing but this crass mumble rap, which is pretty much promoting Big Pharma, because all they're doing is talking about drugs, which are not even drugs that we're really selling on the streets. We're talking about pharmaceutical drugs that have to be given to you by a doctor and distributed legally by someone else. Media has done things to a point where they control the mindset and the outlook of how minorities are looked, and nobody seems to pay attention to that. Because if you still had Chuck D, I always wonder what the world would be like if Biggie and Tupac didn't die. if you still had that positive image and you still had that content that was touching people, you know, Teen Summit was everything to me to understand life.
Yeah.
You know, those little things matter, but media controls our kids in a way that, you know, a parent can't affect that stuff. So media is controlling them in a whole nother way. But how do you change the message and the storyline, or how do we help you guys get your story out in a different way so that impact is shown? Because, you know, 1,000 people might watch this, 20 people are going to share. Now, hundreds of people are going to come to us and be like, we love your show, but it's not about, they don't want to share that content, and then we can't control the algorithms on Facebook.
Right.
How do we help change the narrative of what you guys are doing? Because it's so positive, but we can't go to WSVN and tell them, hey, you need to cover Breakthrough Miami. You need to go to FIU and talk to Chris Caines. How do we help you change this narrative at this point? Because they've changed the station on us.
Right.
The music is different.
The music is different. I think you throw a cloth of positivity around a child, right? And so as parents and leaders, we need to surround the child with certain protections that allow the message to be constructed by us, right? So much of our struggle right now is authorship, right? When we talk about entrepreneurship and tech and things like that, when you're looking at Ava DuVernay and the work she's doing, we're trying to control the narrative there, using technology with SoundCloud rappers. There's positive SoundCloud rappers, right? Mm-hmm. And so if we make use of technology and we understand, we have a full comprehension of what some of the messaging is presented to our children on the mainstream, what we need to do is then construct an environment where we control the messaging, right? So environments like at Breakthrough, the students are surrounded by other students that understand that academics is important. You can play football. I don't like the argument that we're investing too much in football. Our kids are talented in football. That's why they play a lot of football. But they can do that and also be really good at students. You know, it's not a sum-zero game, right? So the Miami Centrals can exist, the Northwestern can exist, but they can also have a really good orchestra. They could also really have a really strong chess team, and we can salute the football team and celebrate them because we're multifaceted, right?
Right.
At this point in my life, I can tell you right now, from somebody that played football having seizures, I'm almost borderline anti-football, because if you look at if you're talking about stuff like somebody like Chris and you're pulling in data and stats,
right,
sports is almost the worst investment you can make into your children. And from the basis of brain damage and everything else, it's hard for me to support that avenue. I mean, honestly, teach your kids how to.
But in certain communities, that football coach is the only front line.
I'm not saying he's not, but teach them how to play baseball. It's other options. I'm saying we don't have to be limited.
We don't have to be limited.
Teach them lacrosse. Can you imagine all these black kids playing football if they was playing rugby? They'll be in every northeastern school that you wanted. They'll be in every Ivy school.
But if the student, so how many of our students have access to lacrosse? It goes back
it's
to the racial structures that we're talking about, right?
It's cheaper than football.
Right. If you don't go to Ransom, you don't go to Miami Country Day School. Where you
it's
going
not
to
just
learn
school. Yeah.
What school? What public school has a lacrosse program?
It's the same as a football program. We implement what we know, but we limit ourselves to what we know because of our comfort zones.
Right.
My thing is 2018 should be kicking down all these comfort zones.
And
it's just too many people that's way too comfortable.
I agree with you. But the football programs, the Pop Warner programs also serve a purpose in making sure that the kids are going to school, doing their homework. And gambling. That single mom has somebody that's going, you know what, you need to go talk to coach because coach going to make sure you get the homework done. I know we have to make do
a lot
what
of
we have.
I play football.
You know?
A lot of athletes and a lot of the ones that are being recruited aren't doing their homework.
Right.
They're not getting the grades. They're still getting shuffled through a system that's no different than the prison system, and it's just a different kind of pipeline. The only thing is it's a higher level of benefit because you're talking about another multi-billion-dollar industry that they can make money off of the aspect of somebody playing sports.
I agree wholeheartedly.
So it's hard for me to embrace that when if you don't have that same dedication just to education, but you have it to sports, I'm not feeling it no more.
Right.
I'm just not feeling it because you have way too many. Isaiah Thomas barely knew how to read and write. You have way too many athletes that made it all the way through and don't know how to read and write. Mm-hmm. So where were they passing the SAT at? Where were they passing the ACT? University of Miami is a private college that I barely got into. Are you really telling me those athletes are passing those tests?
Right, but there's some that do. Actually.
I'm not agreeing with the 8% we're talking about. I'm talking about the other 92 on the table.
I understand what you're saying. I just think that when you're in the work it's like a chess game, right?
Right.
You want a net positive. So you're going to have to take some of those negatives. You got to take some of those L's. But if you net positive, if you can change a child's life so that it can impact the next generation, and if football is that medium, right, so that the next child doesn't have to play on a football field.
But a medium to another level.
But take it to another level.
I
So
got
maybe, Najee Davenport has to be a running back for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but his daughter will surely be something else. You
Yeah.
understand what I'm
We're
saying?
still talking about 0.6% of the world, though. That's
right,
a small number.
Right.
Chris,
So it's some of the something.
what do we do with FIU to help, actually, as Toya was saying, you're already accumulating the data. How do we help implementation to start making some of these changes that you're looking forward to making? Or, better yet, what are some of the changes that you are looking forward to making?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's one that I don't know if I have a great answer for yet.
You always have
to
good answers,
respect
Chris.
that.
Just tell us the truth.
We know you knew. It's okay.
I think my mind is still spinning. We were talking about music, and if Biggie was alive, and then Tupac was alive, and then we got into football, and then we got Stephen A. Smith over here, and then we had that. It was like a lot going on there. Look, there's so many, there are levels to everything, right? And so we are hopefully going to have a platform in which people will listen to us. I think some of the media coverage that we've already gotten in the Huffington Post, in the Herald, and hopefully in more and more platforms helps get the data out there and start the conversation. But we're not elected officials, right? We're not even that many voters, just our team ourselves. It's going to be people actually pursuing policy and people who can implement policy that's in line with their best interests, that's ultimately going to be needing to take it forward. And so I think to the extent that platforms like Digital Grass exist and reach people who might not consume other kinds of media, I think it's a really important platform for us to say, hey, look, this is what's going on in our community. You are feeling this, you know this, here is the language to describe it, right? I think about even just the conversation you're having and talking about like football and that as a platform. That's just what people know and what they're rewarded for, right? Mm-hmm. So the idea of being able to present data and information to people and to give them facts and receipts for what they already know. We already know to be happening that this is an unequal city and this is an unequal world, right? Yes. But what if I could give you some really, really good data from some really fancy people and get you in front of some other people and get that conversation started. And then when you come in with your experience, not only are you talking about the struggles that you have to go through on a daily basis, but you also have your receipts with you. It's like, it's not just me, it's not a failure of an individual, but a failure of a broader societal system that's standing behind.
Yeah, and that whole dialogue that you just gave just popped into my mind, the whole alternative facts situation that we have. And with the work that you're doing, are you prepared to be presented by people who come from that side, who are going to be like, no, it's not that. Look, this is what we're doing over here. You know what I mean? How do you combat that, and how do you make sure that their sort of smoke and mirrors don't cloud what you're doing and stop the efforts that you're trying to put in place?
I think it's a good question. And just to reiterate, we're nonpartisan. There's many sides to everything, right? And so I actually recently changed my Twitter bio from opinions are mine alone to opinions are mine, facts belong to everybody. Because the DMs got a little crazy after I said something to the effect of when my parents were married, when my parents were born, I'm interracial. At the time they were born, there were parts of the country where they wouldn't be able to marry each other, right? And when I started dating somebody I'm dating now in 2014, we weren't allowed to get married in over half the country. Right. That's a fact. That's not up for debate. That's not a debate, right? But in this climate, there's a push to take issue with certain things, for people to read into things that they don't see. And so I have no doubt, that's kind of a tangent, but I have no doubt that there will be times where we're coming up with something that's very well researched and documented, but is an uncomfortable truth.
Right.
And it could be
I was about to
something
say,
that's
but that's
hard to
what we need.
understand. But again, it's not even a thing of like, this is pointing figures and this is the problem, this is whatever. It's like, no, this is just the reality of where we're at.
And that's
Now
what
let's
I'm
have
saying.
a
We need more
conversation. Now let's
people
have
to
a
tell the honest
conversation
truth. Right.
about how we're gonna get forward. You're gonna have this idea for how to move forward. You're gonna have this idea to how to move forward. Some of them I might agree more or less with, but let's at least start from a place where, okay, this is the number. You don't get to say anything else.
And I think that that's part of the dialogue that we're seeing is that people just want to get down to the facts. Like,
Right.
can we just talk about the facts and not get caught up in this is what you believe, this is what your bubble is saying, this is what my bubble is saying,
Can we
and then we
do
can't even hear
everything
each
but
other.
what Sarah Huckabee is doing? Can we actually just tell the truth?
Right? Like, facts be facts. Can facts be facts?
That's what she's saying. It's facts, though.
No, she don't. She knows she lying. So we have our quick six, but I'm going to actually derive our quick six from some of the comments you guys made. So my first question to both
Elaborate
of
on
you.
the quick six. What's
So
the
quick six is you're pretty much responding in one sentence. It's not an elaborated response. I will cut you off. It's one sentence. So it's kind of like
Or one
Q&A.
word, depending on the question.
Yeah, or one word, all right?
Okay.
You got that? Okay. How do we increase intellectual passion in South Florida?
Expand the definition of intellectual passion so we appreciate everybody for where they're at. Like,
That's it. I got it. Calm
I'm
down.
about to go
No
on
explanations, no
one. About to
explanations.
go on one.
Go ahead.
You increase intellectual passion by normalizing intellectual curiosity.
Nice.
Who has impacted your journey thus far the most?
You know what? I would have to say it was the students at Edison Park Elementary.
Okay.
My first job.
My grandma.
All right. So, if we had to hack the system to improve South Florida, what's the first thing you would change?
The school system.
You can't change history, but I would have like mandatory civics classes so everybody understood that this part of the country has a really, really hard history.
That was a good
Hashtag thoughts and prayers.
Ooh.
What's your response?
Hashtag thoughts and prayers. First thing that comes to mind is the students in Parkland. There's 17 students in Parkland. I woke up this morning and I was like, I've worked on campuses for over 20 years, and I've always kept in the back of my mind, if somebody came into the classroom, I'm gonna have to take that L. And so that always brought it closer to me, that if somebody comes in and tries to harm my children, I'm gonna take that L. And so that's probably the first thought that comes to mind.
Inadequate, inefficient, and a societal shame on the level of almost nothing else.
Chris be going there, boy. Chris, if you decide to
Be
go into
ready.
politics, it's
Out the hill.
it's gonna be something, boy. It's gonna be something. Changing the narrative. What's the headline you want to see versus what you're seeing?
You go first, Weber.
You good.
I got it going. So people saying all growth is good and growth is absolute good and innovation is an end unto itself and entrepreneurship is an end unto itself, instead of realizing that they are tools for greater transformational community change, and these are opportunities for us to harness the great power for good, but acknowledging and appreciating the awesome power that can be used and mobilized for bad in the advancement of some really, really scary institutions.
Chris, how old are you?
Right.
How old are you, Chris?
I'm still trying to figure out what he just said.
I just want y'all to know, Chris is like a 20-something-year-old, man. Chris running for
Be
office.
laying
That's all Chris. The setup.
Love, what else?
Short and sweet.
Sure, yeah. That's the T-shirt.
Yeah,
Yeah.
love, what else?
Give it to us, Toya.
What's your favorite thing about Miami?
Man, let me tell you, Miami is schizophrenic.
That's your favorite thing?
That is what I love about Miami. You go to a certain city, it's the same thing wherever you go. But in Miami, you turn a corner,
never know.
you eating croquetas. You turn another corner, you got fried chicken. You go down to Overtown, you got House of Wings. Like, it's just, it's insane.
Yeah.
You know, right? And you're ebbing and flowing between language and all the smells. And, man, I feel sorry for individuals that live in Miami and won't go to certain neighborhoods.
Yeah.
All right,
'Cause you miss
hold on.
so
No,
much.
that's a whole nother show. Let's not forget.
Right.
You miss
I'm
so
gonna wrap
much.
it up there.
No, that's
Go ahead,
real.
Chris.
That's
my
real.
favorite part of Miami.
It's the most interesting and dynamic city we have, and those are like trite words, but if you want an idea of what America is going to look like in 30 to 40 years, Miami's the place to be, whether it's sea level rise challenges, urban mobility, demographic change. All of, like, my pitch to national funders is on the other side trying to fundraise now, is that if you are a national funder who wants to invest in Chicago in 40 years, you better start in Miami now, because every problem that's going to be in every other major city is already here.
Yeah.
And if you can find a solution for something here, we get to act as a model for other things.
I'm gonna cut you off because that's a
That's
whole
real.
other
That's
conversation.
but that's right.
So with that being said, we do send our prayers and condolences.
Absolutely.
It's a big difference for us because, as we said, it happened right down the street. It's not like a typical situation. Actually, we were on the highway going to buy food for Valentine's Day when we saw the SWAT truck pass us. And he was like, why is the SWAT truck passing us and getting on the turnpike? At that point, we didn't know because they were going to try to protect children. And it just kind of brought everything into perspective.
Yep.
And just a closing thought for everybody that's watching this. We don't ask tough questions because we don't love Miami. We ask tough questions because we want to change the narrative. And a lot of people come to South Florida to party, to hang out. And it's kind of like that friend that comes to your house for that house party and they show up empty-handed, and even though they show up empty-handed, they never stay to help you clean. And then they get home and they tell everybody how great the party was. You get to a point where you realize that's not the person you want showing up. I love the party. I'm just tired of the cleanup. Just want to change some of the guests. And with that being said, I would like to thank Chris and Weber for coming out. I really appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Appreciate you.
Yeah. Really good conversation.
Thank you to our sponsors, Knight Foundation, World Famous House of Mac, Digital Grass, Unicorn Agency, Junction 2027, Venture Cafe, and CIC Miami. Please remember to make sure that you comment, let us know what other ports you want to see, share the content, more important than anything, and help each other. This is a part of our Becoming One series, and hopefully we'll see these two organizations collaborate in some way.